Hello again, it's Matthew from Matthew North Music here. Now today's video doesn't start with any video, it's just got some still photos, and the reason for that is quite simple. I initially wasn't going to be making a video on this topic. However, as time progressed, it got way more interesting than I thought it was going to be, and therefore it's going to be a video. Now the other day I was looking on Facebook Marketplace and I happened to stumble across this particular advert. Looking at the photograph, it looked like a 4x12 speaker, and it looked like it was probably a Marshall. Then, looking at the photograph on the back, it showed the back of the cabinet, and it was definitely a Marshall because it had a Marshall serial number badge. Looking at it a little bit more closely, it then dawned on me this actually might be something quite old. So anyway, I went to the seller, and I bought the cabinet off him. I quickly heard it being tested and it seemed to work, and I got it back to where I store all my equipment, and I took the back off, and this is what I found. As you can see, inside the cabinet there's actually 4 loudspeakers, and even though 2 look similar, none of them are actually the same. And I began to wonder why this was, and my conclusion is that this cabinet had probably had a bit of a life. It's certainly been well gigged, and looking at the side, it has some homemade handles added for transportation. And this is another reason why I thought this cab might be rather interesting, and that's because these handles were there because there was nothing else. Here's the cab then with its speakers taken out, and you can actually see through the grille cloth. But if we look a bit closer at the grille cloth, we can see this has actually been replaced at some point in the past. What really gave this the indication that this was much older than a normal 4x12 are these bolts here and these bolts here, because these are the bolts that hold on the leather straps that you'd use as a handle to lift the speaker cabinet up. On the side of the cab, even though somebody's added these handles at some point in the past, there are no recessed handles that you would expect to find on a normal 4x12. And having looked at a 4x12 in a catalogue from 1967, in 67 they definitely had handles, but if you look at pictures online from 66, they didn't, which makes me think that's when this cab was made. Looking at the bottom of the cab, you can see it's very well road worn, but then this speaker is well over 50 years old. Here you can see a piece of doweling. Now this is where the original casters would have fitted, and they would have been bolted on with a shallow indentation here for the caster fitting, and that looks pretty much like how the originals would have been. What I propose to do with this cab at some point in the future is I'll just put some ordinary casters in, very much like any other sort of 4x12 of that time. So I'll probably get some from like an upholsterer's website or something that would fit this kind of design, but I haven't got them yet, so they won't be going on. This then is the most recent of the 4 speakers that was inside the cabinet. This is a Celestion G1280, and this one dates from around 1979. It's 15 ohm impedance, which is correct for a 4x12. You normally have 4 16 ohm speakers in a standard 4x12. It says 15, but you know, it's close enough. This one here, if we lift it up, it's got a very heavy magnet on it, and it was originally painted with this sort of white paint that sort of faded off over time. If we look at the cone, the cone's very solid. There's not much movement there. You can feel the force, and it's got the cone cover there, and it's in very good condition actually, and it works perfectly. All the speakers that came out the cab all work perfectly. So that's the first one anyway, that G12. Now this is the other Celestion that was in the cab. This is a cream back, and it's 16 ohms. Again, that's the correct impedance. And if we look at the date codes on the side here, I did a little bit of researching, and I think this one is from 1976. Now again, like the other one, it's very solid there. The actual cone looks immaculate. And again, this one sounds really good, and it works perfectly. This is actually quite a desirable loudspeaker, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this because I've got other cabs that do need speakers, and I might well keep this. I might well look out for another one, and I might sort of pair it up and put it in a 2x12 cabinet. Haven't quite decided yet, but I think I will probably use this for something. Here now are the other two speakers that are in the cabinet. They're both Goodmans, and they're both Audium 12P power range speakers, except there's one minor difference. This one's 8 ohm and this one's 15 ohm. And also, if you look at the baskets, they are definitely a different colour. This is the old one, which is a slightly thicker metal, and it's sort of like a sort of metallic hammerite-y sort of colour. It's all very similar to the colour of my Alpico amp. And this one's a more sort of silvery, plain finish. Now, I did wonder if this might have been an original speaker, because Marshall did do a 200 watt bass cab that had Goodman speakers inside it, but this definitely looks a little bit too new. I would have said this was made in the early 70s, and I've looked up period appropriate Goodman speakers from the 60s and they look completely different to this, so I'm pretty sure this isn't original, as are none of the others that were in the cab. Well, the first thing with restoring this cabinet, if I was able to, I would replace the grill cloth, because this grill cloth isn't original. I would have said this was probably added in the 70s. The original grill cloth would have probably got ripped at some point. However, I am having trouble trying to source some of the salt and pepper basket weave type grill cloth for this cab. So for the moment, I'm going to keep the original grill cloth on here, but eventually I would like to replace it, and I will also get an age specific badge for this, which will actually be one like the one that's on the Marshall Bluesbreaker. As I tilt up the cab, you can see the piece of wood here where the badge would fit, and you can see that the width of the wood is about the width of the span of my hand, so the actual badge will be about that wide, which would show that this would have had the smaller style Marshall badge, as all cabs did of that era. If we look inside this cab, you can see it's very, very clean and tidy indeed. Good solid plywood construction. You can even see an identifier here for what type of wood that's used to make the cab. And if we look in the bottom there, you can see where the caster holes have been filled in with some sort of wood and glue. I wouldn't have said the Tolex has ever been replaced on this cab. I think it's probably all original. I mean, it's had plenty of rips and marks, which you kind of expect from a cab of this age. However, mostly it looks pretty good, and certainly I wouldn't really want to think about replacing any of it. Just leaning up here is the back of the cabinet, and even the back has got plenty of battle scars, but nothing you wouldn't expect. Well, it was the distinctive serial number plate and the style of jack socket that made me immediately know this was a completely genuine Marshall. The question is then, what am I going to load this cabinet with? Am I going to buy some very old, rare, vintage speakers to go inside this that could easily set me back £2,000 or £3,000? That's never going to happen. One, I can't afford it, and two, there's no guarantee that they're going to be reliable, because the nature of what they are, old load speakers could possibly pop. However, there is a very good compromise, and it's this. And I have 4 of these, and we're going to open one up. And we have a brand new Celestion Greenback, and I have 4 of these. Now, you might have seen one of these before in the video I did about building the Fender Tweed Deluxe clone, because I originally had an A-tone Greenback in that cabinet. I then later changed it because Greenbacks don't really suit Fender tone, but these are perfect for Marshalls, and I've got 4 of these, and I'm going to bolt them inside the cabinet, and I'm then going to wire them up. These are actually the original bolts that were inside the cabinet, and I'm going to reuse these because these work perfectly well. There was one missing, and someone had put a screw in its place, and I should probably just recycle that. But these bolts mostly all have their original washers as well. These are shape-proof washers to stop them falling out. So it's not going to take me long to get these speakers inside the cabinet, and then we'll wire them up. Okay, you probably can't see this very well, but the speakers are going to be mounted with the connections for them touching the column in the middle. Now there's a reason for this, and it's basically just to make it that little bit simpler for wiring them up. Well, there's 2 in and there's 2 more to go, and it's certainly already starting to look the part. The 4 speakers are all now in place. Here you probably just about see that is the dodgy screw that was in it originally. Now it's where it was when I found it. I don't have a spare age appropriate bolt for the cabinet to go in there, and I thought, you know what, that was probably put in there in the early 70s. So it's been with this cabinet probably longer than I've been alive, so I just popped that back in there. It's not doing any harm. Now the reason that these are all facing each other is how I'm going to wire it, and it's going to be wired in what we call a serial parallel connection. These are all 16 ohm speakers. The 2 this side and the 2 this side, they will be wired in parallel, making 2 8 ohm circuits. We then connect them together by looping these 2 ends together here, and then the signal will come in here and leave here, and so these 2 are effectively in series. So 2 parallel speakers and then wired together in series, and that gives us our 16 ohm load, and it should all be in phase as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wire them up. Well, here's a funny thing. I actually have some of the original wire that was in the speaker, and because the cabinet was working when I bought it, there's no reason I couldn't repurpose and reuse some of the original internal wiring from the cabinet. And I would say this was probably almost definitely original for when the cabinet was first manufactured in 1966, or maybe even a few months before that. I was able to repurpose as much of the wire as I could. The other long length of red, it didn't want to tin on the end, so it's almost like it's sort of corroded. So anyway, I replaced that. This is original, these are all originals. This one just about reached. And I'm going to put some fresh wire to feed the input of the speaker, and then we'll give it a test. Well, the question is, how does this amp sound with the cab? Well, here's my JTM 45, which is my favourite amp of all the ones Marshall ever made. Now what's interesting as well, this cab was made in 66, and I once had a 1966 or thereabouts Plexi like this. At the time, I didn't know what it was worth, and I made the biggest gaffe in history because I sold it for £300 in 1999. Funnily enough, the person that bought it didn't even want to see it switched on, and now I know why, and those of you that know will know. But if anyone watching this has one of these, made in 66 with a serial number 2070, that was mine, and I basically regret selling it. Anyway, that's the cab that I normally use with this amp up here, and I also have a 2x12 cab with some generic speakers in that I use it with. But this is the real deal, so let's have a little listen. So that's with the middle pickup position. I'm just going to put the rhythm pickup. And the top pickup. So that's basic clean tone with the amp. I'm not going to crank it up to full volume yet, but what I might do is a comparison video between this cab, that cab, and the 2x12. However, I don't think there's going to be a lot of difference between that and a 2x12 Greenbacks, but we'll see. And that one, which is a much more modern 4x12, yeah, we'll have a play with that. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed this video and found it interesting. I certainly didn't think I would ever find one of these, and they are certainly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And it's quite fitting that in my 30th year of being a musician and coming up to being nearly 50 years old, I finally got what I consider to be my amplification dream. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.